of remarks, and they could lead to a harsher sentence for him.
Can I ask you, Katrina, about taking us to that moment when the judge indicated to the packed courtroom that the jury had in fact reached a verdict? Because there was reporting from many outlets, including our own, that Donald Trump seemed to sort of be in good spirits at a later point in the day. At around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he seemed to be in good spirits. What happened then?
It was such a strange moment because, as you said, the judge had actually told us that we were all done for the day. Trump was smiling. He was talking with his attorney, Todd Blanche. The reporters were all getting ready to go home. And then suddenly the judge came back in, said the jury had a verdict, and the whole tone shifted. Everything went still. There was just this incredible feeling of tension in the air. And then the judge brought the jury in. They read those guilty verdicts. I think it was just a couple of minutes and all 34 counts were found guilty. And Trump just sat there very surprisingly contained. He didn't have a lot of expression. It almost seemed as though his eyes were closed for part of the time, which was a normal posture for him during this trial, but was surprising when this verdict was coming down. And
so there you see the former president there. Again, as I say, we are going to monitor his remarks, and if he makes some news or he starts to take questions from members of the press, we'll bring that live. But Katrina, the juries, and you and Errol pointed this out, the fact that a lot of people today who are Trump supporters, and including the former president himself, are suggesting that the entire legal system is rigged because of this trial. The jurors were selected by not just the prosecutors. Talk to us about the process by which even Trump's lawyers said, yes, this juror should sit on this jury because we feel that they're impartial.
I mean, the jury selection process took a week. They went through over 100 jurors, and each side is able to get rid of certain jurors during that process. They have both, I think, 10 people they don't have to have a really strong reason that they want to get rid of, and then they can also have for-cause challenges. I think there were a couple jurors that Trump's team was not happy with that did end up on this jury, but the judge listened to their case on those people, and he thought that they were going to be impartial. And I really do think that this jury took their job extremely seriously. Hearing them during jury selection and then just observing them during the trial, you have the sense that they really were trying to hear out this case. They were paying such close attention to every witness, to every moment of this trial. And I didn't really view them as looking as though they were biased, although you obviously don't know what's going on in someone's head.
Well, that's the nature of compromise. I mean, you can't strike every single potential juror that you don't like, or else it would just go on forever. You never pick a jury, right? So you get a set amount. You can strike a certain amount. Both sides get their chance. And you get what you get.
Oh, and let's not forget one of the jurors,
I was about to mention
because there was the survey of where these jurors got their news from. There was at least one juror.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Who said that they got most of their news from Truth Social,
which is
Donald Trump's social media platform that's very pro-Trump. Now, this person said they get, they pay attention to all the outlets as well, but that's something that they really do trust and pay attention to. And both sides, to Katrina's point, because you only get so many strikes, agreed to these 12 jurors and the alternates to be the ones who would ultimately decide Donald Trump's guilt or innocence. And another point is that each of the 34 counts were effectively based on 11 different instances. It was 11 checks, 11 invoices, and the corresponding vouchers. So you really only needed to convince the jury of one simple narrative, that Donald Trump falsified the record and did so pursuing an election through unlawful means. And because of the jury instructions that they requested and the testimony they requested.
Many circumstances. You saw what happened to some of the witnesses that were on our side. They were literally crucified by this man who looks like an angel, but he's really a devil. He looks so nice and soft. People say, oh, he seems like such a nice man. No, unless you saw him in action. And you saw that with a certain witness that went through hell. And when we wanted to do things, he wouldn't let us do those things. But when the government wanted something, they got everything. They got everything they wanted. It was a rigged trial. We wanted a venue change where we could have a fair trial, We didn't get it. We wanted a judge change. We wanted a judge that wasn't conflicted. And obviously he didn't do that. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. We had a DA who was a failed DA. Crime is rampant in New York, violent crime. That's what he's really supposed to be looking at. Crime is rampant in New York. Yesterday in McDonald's, you had a man hitting him up with machetes, a machete. Whoever can imagine even a machete being wielded in a store, in a place where they're eating, and he's going rampant. And Bragg is down watching a trial on what they call crimes. They're falsifying business records. That sounds so bad. To me, it sounds very bad. You know, it's only a misdemeanor, but to me, it sounds so bad. When they say falsifying business, that's a bad thing for me. I've never had that before. I'm falsifying. You know what falsifying business records is? In the first degree. They say falsifying business records. Sounds so good, right? It means that legal expense. I paid a lawyer, totally legal. I paid a lawyer a legal expense. And a bookkeeper, without any knowledge from me, correctly marked it down in the books. A very professional woman, highly respected. She testified. Marked it down in the books as a legal expense. So a legal expense, paid a lawyer, is a legal expense in the books. It's not sheetrock, construction, or any other thing. It's a legal expense. Think of that. This is what the falsification of business records were. And I said, what else are you going to call it? What else are you going to call it? Now, I would have testified. I wanted to testify. The theory is you never testify, because as soon as you testify, anybody, if it were George Washington, don't testify, because they'll get you on something that you said slightly wrong, and then they sue you for perjury. But I didn't care about that. I wanted to. But the judge allowed them to go into everything that I was ever involved in, not this case, everything that I was ever involved in, which is a first. In other words, you could go into every single thing that I ever did. Was he a bad boy here? Was he a bad boy there? And my lawyer said, what do you need to go through? And all you wanted to do is I simply, I would have loved to testify. To this day, I would have liked to have testified. But you would have said something out of whack, like it was a beautiful.
That you shouldn't send this man to prison just because of Cohen's testimony or the evidence. Now, a prison sentence.
Showing up on the first page of Google might not be the best for everyone.
Still, another issue I see with Donald Trump making what he hopes is a presidential kind of statement at Trump Tower. This was the nexus of the scheme. This was the location.
I could go through the books of any business person in this city, and I could find things that in theory, I guess, let's indict him, let's destroy his life. But I'm out there, and I don't mind being out there because I'm doing something for this country, and I'm doing something for our Constitution. It's very important, far beyond me. And this can't be allowed to happen to other presidents. This is bigger than Trump. This is bigger than me. This is bigger than my presidency. And the people understand it because I just see a poll just came out, the Daily Mail. That was the first one, came out, was done last night right after the verdict, where I'm up 6 points. 6 points from what we already were. We were leading fairly substantially. We're up 6 points in the Daily Mail poll. Now, maybe other polls come out and it says something differently, but a lot of people have predicted it because the public understands, and they understand what's going on. This is a scam. There's a rigged trial. It shouldn't have been in that venue. We shouldn't have had that judge. He should have allowed us to have an election expert. We had the best expert, most respected expert, head of the Federal Elections Commission. He was all set to testify. He was waiting for 2 days. And when it was his turn, Bragg's people protested. And the judge knocked him out, said, you can't testify. He actually said you can't testify for anything having to do with the trial. You can say what the federal elections is. Well, that doesn't help. Everybody knows that. But you can't testify. So essentially, he wasn't able to testify. Other people weren't able to testify. But with these people, they were able to use people salacious. By the way, and nothing ever happened. There was no anything. Nothing ever happened, and they know it. But they were as salacious as they could be, and it had nothing to do with the case, but it had to do with politics. And do you notice the timing? The timing was perfect. This case was dead. It was dropped by every agency, every governmental board. It was dropped by the highly respected Southern District. They said, no, there's no case here. It was dropped by federal election, and that's what it's about. This is about a federal election, not a state election. You're not even allowed to look at it. They took the state and the city, and they went into a federal election. They're not allowed. The people from federal election, Southern District, and Washington dropped the case. Everybody dropped the case. There was no case. Cy Vance dropped the case. And when Bragg came in, he said, this is the most ridiculous case I've ever seen. And who would have a certain person, again, gag order, who would have a certain person like this ever testify? He said, this is essentially one of the worst people I've ever seen ever to testify. He said, the craziest case I've ever seen, this is Bragg. Then when I announced I was running for president, a long time later, they decided to revive this case. And they got a judge, Judge Marchand, who was responsible for another case that was also brought. It destroyed the life of a very good man, by the way. Destroyed the life of a very good man who went to prison once, and then they just put him in prison again because they said he lied. He didn't lie. I looked at the statements he made. In fact, he didn't remember something, and they put him in jail. Again, they've destroyed him. With me for many years, he was an honorable person. He was an honest man. And if you look at what he did, supposedly, it never happened. There's never been anything like this. Over the education of his grandchildren. Over, he didn't report that he had a car or 2 cars on his income. I don't know. I wonder how many people here have cars. I wonder how many people said, oh, gee, I have a car that's worth X dollars. How do you even figure it? And I guess you do have to report it, but I would say probably almost nobody does. Nobody even thinks about it. They put this man, they destroyed this man, but they put him in jail again because they didn't want him to testify. They didn't want him to testify. That's why he went to jail. They put him in jail twice. He's 77 years old. Now, normally I'd say that's an old guy, but I don't feel 77. Nobody ever says that about me. I'd like them to say, gee, we have to have a little sorrow for this man, because they just don't say that about me, but maybe I'm better off that way. I think I'm probably better off that way. But they put him in jail twice. And you have to see what they put him in jail. And he was threatened by the judge. This man was told, you're going to get 15 years in jail if you don't give up Trump. And he was told that. You're going to get 15 years in jail. And he made a plea deal because he didn't want to spend the rest of his life. And he was told that viciously. We're living in a fascist state. He was told that viciously. So you can go to jail for 4 months, 5 months, or you can get 15 years in jail. So do a plea. Almost who wouldn't do that plea? Everyone does those pleas. It's a horrible thing. There's a whole group of lawyers that fight that. It's so unfair. It's so unfair. But they destroyed his life. So many other things. You look at Southern District didn't want to bring the case. Nobody wanted to bring the case. And then you know who didn't want to bring the case? Most of all is Bragg. Bragg didn't want to bring it. But then he brought it. And they tried to make it a different case. They didn't say legal expense equal legal expense. Again, if I wrote down and paid a lawyer, and by the way, this was a highly qualified
And we've
lawyer.
been listening to the first Extensive prepared remarks by former President Trump reacting to the conviction yesterday, found guilty on 34 felonies by a jury in his hush money trial in New York, making him the first former president in U.S. history to be convicted of a crime. And joining me now is CBS 2's political reporter Marcia Kramer, as well as civil and criminal attorney Dante Mills. Thank you both for joining us. And Dante, is there any reaction to what Trump just said?
Yes, it is. I just want to touch on a few points because he walked through a lot in that press conference. From my understanding, it's not with a teleprompter. He's kind of just speaking from the top, which we know he liked to do. He mentioned a lot about the gag order. I think it's important for us to understand what that is. The gag order is still in place, but the gag order only covers Trump talking about witnesses specifically, jurors specifically, and then the family and staff of the prosecutors and the court. That's the only thing he can't talk about. He is allowed to talk about the case. He's allowed to talk about the judge, the prosecutor himself. Here, Trump talking about Bragg. So he mentioned the gag order as far as a restriction, but that just restricts him talking about witness jurors and then family members of the court and the prosecutor. So we have to understand that he does have the ability to talk about this case. Is it helpful to him? I don't know, maybe not. The judge clearly is listening when Trump speaks, because they talked about some of his comments during the trial at his press conferences. So will that factor into his sentencing? We don't know, but Trump is risking that because he's not showing remorse, which is something judges look for when they sentence someone after they're found guilty. And we know that sentencing is coming up on July 11th. We'll see what their arguments are and if the tone changes as we get closer to sentencing.
And speaking of that sentencing, Justice Juan Merchan has broad discretion when imposing a sentence and could limit the punishment to a fine, to probation, to home confinement. I mean, what are your thoughts about that, Dante?
So there's a possibility here that former President Donald Trump can go to jail. We know that he's been convicted of 34 felonies, and each felony has a term of 1.5 to 4 years that he's eligible to go to prison for, and that's times 34. We don't expect any of these sentences to be stacked. The court doesn't have to do that. They can give one sentence within that range. Normally, for people in this situation with these types of felonies, no criminal history, which President Trump does not have, we will be looking at about 6 months in jail. So it is a strong possibility he goes to jail. If he is sentenced to jail on July 11th, his attorneys will ask the court to suspend that sentence while they file an appeal. And I think the expectation is the judge would do that. He would let this appeal play out before former President Trump would have to turn himself in. But it is a possibility he goes to jail. We know that Alvin Bragg is making a point to say that this person was now convicted of trying to impact or influence an election, and he's in the middle of another election. So they're going to argue that it's important to have a stiff penalty, severe penalty, to deter him and anyone else from trying to interfere in another election. So they're going to argue that jail time is warranted. Trump's team is going to say it's not. And then they're going to bring up the appeal. So we'll see what the judge does on July 11th.
Yeah, let's talk about that sentencing date. It's just 4 days before the start of the Republican National Convention, when Trump will be formally nominated to be the party's standard bearer. What are you expecting to see, Marcia?
Well, what I'm expecting to see is him to go on the campaign trail and to try to make it seem like he's the Teflon Don, that these charges won't stick to him and he's going to pretend he doesn't have this as a problem. He's going to move on. Now, he gave us a taste of what he's going to be looking at the beginning of his remarks when he said that they want to raise your taxes and they want to prevent you from having cars. I think that what he was talking about was the move for congestion pricing, and he was in New York, and he also was talking about the move towards electric cars. But clearly, that's going to be part of the talking points as they move towards the debate, which is next month. Now, I can tell you that the Biden campaign is also preparing for that debate, and what they want to do is that they want to tie him to the move by the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. They think that's a really important issue to get women to go to the polls. They also want to tie him to trying to say that the 2020 election wasn't fair. And lastly, they want to talk about the economy, as Trump is talking about the economy. But the point that the Biden people will try to make is that Trump will raise your taxes and will be on poor people, but he will be good for the rich. And why we're talking about this, the key thing with Trump is that he changed the tax policy in terms of people in New York and other states being able to deduct their real estate taxes. It's called SALT. It expires in 2025. The Biden people will try to say, if he's elected, he will renew it in 2025. That's another one of their economic arguments. But clearly, they're moving towards it to the next debate, and Trump is now going to try to make it look like he can get his message to the people about the issues that he thinks he can deliver for the American people.
We did hear quite a bit in the remarks by former President Trump in regard to DA Bragg. And yesterday, Alvin Bragg responded to the decision by the jury. Here's what he had to say.
12 everyday New Yorkers, and of course, our alternates, heard testimony from 22 witnesses, including former and current employees of the defendant, media executives, book publishers, custodians of records, and others. They reviewed call logs, text messages, and emails. They heard recordings. They saw checks and invoices, bank statements, and calendar appointments. This type of white-collar prosecution is core to what we do at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I want to thank this phenomenal prosecution team, embodying the finest traditions of this office: professionalism, integrity, dedication, and service. They are model public servants, and I am proud and humbled to serve side by side with them. The 12 everyday jurors vowed to make a decision based on the evidence and the law, and the evidence and the law alone. Their deliberations led them to a unanimous conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Donald J. Trump, is guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree to conceal a scheme to corrupt the 2016 election. And while this defendant may be unlike any other in American history, we arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors, by following the facts and the law and doing so without fear or favor.
Attorney Dante Mills, I want to send it back over to you and ask you in regard to the appeals process, what might we see here? Can you tell us the next steps?
Absolutely. But first, let me just respond to DA Bragg with that. I'm an attorney. I have to believe in our justice system. The way our system works is we bring in jurors from our community, people in our community, because we want them to tell us what's right and what's wrong. Those 12 people listened intently throughout this entire case. They took days to go over this verdict once they had the jury charge and the case was in their hands. They asked questions of the judge. They wanted those rules that they had to follow, the law read back to them to make sure they understood it. So we have to believe in everything that they witnessed and they heard and saw in their decision. We believe that 12 people, they come together. They don't know each other. They have different backgrounds. That allows them to see things from all angles. So we have to trust what their decision is. I do believe juries get it right. I know that Donald Trump's team is going to appeal. What they're going to be looking for is holes throughout this case, whether the judge let in some evidence that he should not have, whether the gag order was unconstitutional. They're going to be looking for any opening that they had to get a new trial, but it's not going to be easy because generally these cases are ran the right way and appeals are usually not successful. So they are going to have, a high task on their hands to get this verdict overturned. We do know that that's their plan. They're going to appeal it, but in New York, you have to wait until you're sentenced in order to appeal the verdict of the trial, because the trial has to be essentially closed out before you can appeal it. So they have to wait until after the sentencing, but they've made it clear that as soon as this sentencing is over, they're filing for an appeal.
But even if the appeal is heard, we might not see that until after Election Day. How do you think all of this plays in this campaign, Marcia?
Well, I think that what you're going to see is that he's going to pretend that he can just walk on and just be a candidate. I think there's going to be some, oh, woe is me, I could go to jail for 187 years, although that's actually not true, because even if you multiply 4 times 34, it only comes out to 136. Usually in New York, you get about, maybe the most you get is like 4 years from one of the charges. But I think that what he's going to do is he's going to go and play presidential politics. He's going to talk about polls. He's going to talk about his America First policies, and he's going to talk about how he feels that he can bring the country back from what he calls an economic abyss. Obviously, President Biden will have other issues. In fact, President Biden is already trying to respond. He's sending his wife, Jill Biden, to 2 swing states today, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, trying to make an early inroads in the swing states and trying to get them to believe that they should vote for him.
All right, CBS 2 political reporter Marcia Kramer, thank you so much. And civil and criminal attorney Dante Mills, appreciate your comments as well. Thank you so much. And you've been watching a CBS News New York special following the conviction of former President Donald Trump. We will have the latest on this historic decision throughout the day here on CBS News New York. And Alice Gaynor will have a full report on the president's remarks on CBS 2 News at noon. I'm Mary Calvi.
He was like...
Good evening. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On the NewsHour tonight, former President Donald Trump is found guilty on all counts in his criminal hush money trial.
And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win.